Hi, I'm Lori Townsend, and this is the beginning of our lecture series for Business Communications, Business 229. So we're going to take a look at Module 1, Communicating in Business. Okay, here's our learning outcomes. When you're done with this unit, you should be able to discuss how effective communication improves you as an employee, identify the characteristics of the audience in business communication, discuss the process in the social communication model, identify key features of effective writing in business, and discuss the overlap between business and between professional and personal communications. Okay, so the importance of effective communications. As a business professional, you have to make your contribution to the uncovering and understanding process. You should strive to be clear. You don't want to have to write multiple times back and forth. Your first message should be clear and they understand it. Concise. If you told me I'd be teaching writing when I was in high school, I would laugh at you because I hated writing, but it was all because it was more English writing where you're adding all kinds of adjectives and not that being descriptive is bad, but you would go into detail, more detail than I wanted to. Business messages are concise. They're direct and to the point, more like I am. Objective, we want to take the emotional out of it. Consistent, complete, relevant, and I have to understand the audience's knowledge. I have to evaluate my audience because if I'm using jargon, which is defined definitions by work group, I may have, I may have to explain to a layperson what those words mean. Okay, sorry about that. I had somebody at the door. I had to wave them off. Okay, so here's, I don't usually do discussions in the lecture because you can't participate so much when you're not in the room. But look at this drawing. This is in a lot of business communication texts. And it just discusses and illustrates how things could go wrong and why as the communication process. Because originally they want a tire swing and they're getting all these crazy other things. My favorite is number 3. It's designed by the architect. I think architects everywhere should be angry about that. But okay, so we have to evaluate our audience. Why is it important to understand the difference between primary and secondary audiences? And what's the difference between them? So a primary audience is the audience that your communication is intended for. For example, I probably never seen it, but there's a Julia Roberts movie called The Pelican Brief, where she writes a report, The Pelican Brief, that illustrates who did the murder in the movie, which is unimportant. But she wrote it for her boyfriend, who happened to be her law professor. He was the primary audience. He passed it to his friend in the government. That was the secondary audience, the group of people that aren't real stakeholders in your communication. This guy just happened to be an FBI agent and took it seriously, and it turns out she was right, of course. All right, so here's the business communication model. We have our sender, we have our receiver. We start with the sender. I have an idea. Step 1, I have an idea that I want to communicate to you. I'm not communicating it yet. I'm just, I've got a thought. Okay, and then I encode it. Encoding means how am I going to get it to you? It might be in an email. It might be in French. Who knows? But it's moving from me towards the receiver. Then I have the message, where the message could go wrong. Decoding, where you give it meaning as the receiver. And then you either give feedback or we move on and start the whole thing over again. There's always the possibility of noise. Okay, I'm going to tell you a quick story. There was a newscaster named Walter Cronkite. He died several years ago, but he was the CBS evening news person. And he had a boat. He went sailing on his boat to the state of Maine, and he was pulling into port, and people were waving their hands and yelling, "Hello, Walter! Hello, Walter!" And Walter's used to being recognized, so he got up, tipped his hat, took a bow, and hit the ground. What they were really saying was low water, not hello, Walter. Now, there's a lot of things and places where that could go wrong. In the encoding, they were waving their hands and yelling low water. Maybe they should have just yelled stop and worry about the nitty gritty after that. And that would be an encoding error. The message could get distorted by noise. Well, if you've ever been on a boat, when you come into port, you usually come into port under motor, which makes noise. You've got the water slapping against the pier. You've got the water slapping against the boat. Possible seagulls. A lot of times if there's a lot of seagulls at a port, you got, there's a whole lot of noise that could distort this message. And then we decode it. Now, if you've ever been to Maine, it does kind of sound like Walter when they say water. They kind of put an L into it. And so I'm processing it incorrectly. Also, Walter is used to being recognized. So he's decoding it improperly because he's doing it through this filter of always being recognized. So it makes a big difference. Okay, so that's my Walter story. Writing in business, rely on 7 principles of business communications: clear, concise, objective, consistent, complete, relevant, and considerate of the audience knowledge. We already talked about that briefly. Personal versus professional communication. What level of formality is needed from the communicator and the intended audiences? You know, there are certain things that you just do in a letter, and that's because they require higher formality. For example, if you apply for a credit card with my company and I can't give you one, I'm not going to send you an email. I'm going to send you a letter to your address because it requires a little more formality. Okay? All right. We don't want to do the Activia's yogurt. Let's see here. Okay. So 5 key skills for listening. You have to pay close attention. Great to make eye contact, because once you get rid of the eye contact and you're looking at something else, your mind starts to drift. Paraphrase. So if I say to you, okay, we're going to have a test on Monday. It's going to cover chapters 1, 2, and 3. You might want to clarify that and say, I'm going to take 1, 2, and 3 on Monday, right? Is that correct? And that is my paraphrase. Give good body cues. For example, when you stand with your hands on your hips, it's confrontational. It can easily be read, but is that what I want you to take away from our conversation? No. You want to try to minimize distractions, like people coming to your door while you're trying to record a lecture. And you want to keep yourself out of the conversation. Step back and listen. Don't be trying to take part, because a lot of people will wait for their turn to talk and they stop listening. So this can help you prevent that. Okay, verbal and nonverbal communication. Spoken communication is considered less formal. Synchronous, meaning it happens at the same time, but it does help you build a sense of trust because you know the person better. Written communication is considered more formal, like that letter for my not giving you a credit card. Asynchronous, meaning it happens at different times, and it's more impersonal. There are benefits to spoken communication. It's easier to understand. It allows chances for feedback. If I see your face and you look confused, I know maybe I need to put it another way. Needs to be emotional. Allows for input. It creates relationships and bonds to listeners, and it creates a higher degree of certainty. Nonverbal, on the other hand, uses facial expressions, gestures, proximity, how close are you to me, touch, eye contact, and appearance. Okay, so we're going to look a little bit about ethics here. Follow the 7 principles with your communication. Again, clear, concise, objective, consistent, complete, relevant, and understanding of the audience's knowledge. So some guidelines for ethical communication. I am honest. My actions brings respect for and trust in the communication profession. I communicate accurately information and promptly correct any errors. I obey laws and public policies. If I violate any law or public policy, I act promptly to correct the situation. I protect confidential information while acting within the law. I support the ideas of free speech, freedom of assembly, and access to an open marketplace of ideas, or I am sensitive to others' cultural values and beliefs. I give credit to others for their work and cite my sources. That would be plagiarism if I didn't. I do not use confidential information for personal benefit. I do not represent conflicting or competing interests without full disclosure and written consent of those involved. I do not accept undisclosed gifts or payments for professional services for anyone other than a client or employer. And I do not guarantee results that are beyond my power to deliver. Okay, so some principles of ethical design making. Some common principles are legal and regulatory requirements. I got to check them out. Long-term self-interest, personal virtue, utilitarianism, individual rights, distributive justice, and religious injunction. So being ethical online, when posting, you want to use factual information and ensure confidentiality. When using materials, be sure to check the integrity of the source and the copyright. Okay, so staying connected with colleagues, list, document, and work sharing tools, describe private messages and chat tools, and share idea of quality video communication. If I'm staying connected to to customers, I want to use digital communication tools that can provide avenues, but also need to facilitate various methods of communication and the complete social communication model circuit if they're going to be effective. So some tools I can use are project and document sharing tools, websites, blogs, social media, private messages and chat tools, and video chat. Zoom lately? Okay, and there's some review questions at the end, but that's it for Chapter 1. Move on now to your assignment.